All right, we're back in the Bitcoin Atlantis commentary booth, and we just wrapped up a fantastic second day. Again, to remind, the first block was about Bitcoin and energy, curated by Troy Cross. And the afternoon session was about Bitcoin and freedom and human rights, curated by Alex Gladstein. He couldn't make it, but we have Obi and Sarah here to talk a little bit about their respective keynotes and panels. Sarah, can you start us off a little bit about Bitcoin and warfare, what was it, fireside you just did with Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So, and I thought the whole session on freedom was amazing.
Yes.
I thought it was well curated. And so my particular part was connecting how we pay for wars with the way those wars are fought. And Alex Gladstein reached out to me a few years ago, and he said, you wrote this book called Taxing Wars, and it talks about how the move to debt over war taxes has contributed to wars that are longer and less accountable. That's really interesting. And I think that's relevant to Bitcoin. And I said, well, yeah, I see that too. And I think that's why these conversations are so generative, is that people come at these questions from different perspectives. And so our conversation just now was about that connection between the move away from war taxes, creating a distance between the public and accountability and consent, longer wars, and the prospect of some alternative that, like Bitcoin, that might present more accountability.
Fantastic. And so through something like Bitcoin, it can actually lead to some more peace in the world. Is that the general thesis?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Bitcoin peace theory, which is that because it's it's more transparent, but it's also less infinite than, this fiat money that you keep printing or that you keep borrowing, that you therefore have more skin in the game. It's a little bit harder to borrow, which is good if you're thinking about war and peace in the world.
There is this narrative in the space that the First World War, at the time, it was just called the Great War. And just before that was when the fiat currencies really started, when the countries went off the gold standard, starting with the UK and then the rest of Europe. So there is this way of looking at this, that the war is still ongoing, and it's a war between the governments and their populations. Mm-hmm. So that's maybe taking it to its extreme, but there's something there, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that Alex pointed out in our fireside chat, which is that in the U.S. experience, moving away from the gold standard in 71, suddenly now you have this open-endedness and this kind of infinite borrowing. And it really is kind of a historical disjuncture that is quite noticeable. But again, through these conversations with people who look at things different ways, he said, had you thought about that? And I sort of had, but not with the clarity that he brought to the conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe to talk about another angle to the afternoon program, Obi, I know you were on a panel with Jack Dorsey talking about the B-Trust initiative, and Fedi is also working with that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and B-Trust as you understand it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I echo the words just you said now, that this was an incredible program this afternoon. And every talk was relevant and interesting for me. We were talking about B-Trust, but before our talks, there were some incredible talks by human rights defenders and educators. And obviously B-Trust is an educational plus money giving organization. And Fedi, the customers of Fedi are the people on that stage, and we only exist because of a trip to Oslo, a Freedom Forum, 2 years ago, which led to, after hearing their stories, which led to its creation. In terms of B-Trust, B-Trust is an organization that locates, educates, and remunerates talented engineers from around the world with a focus on the global south, starting with Africa. And it's based on the idea that intelligence and capability is evenly distributed, but because of the broken money system we're in, money is not evenly distributed. And the problem with that is not only do people have the outcomes or the potential possibilities are affected by that, but the world loses out as a result, because we miss out on finding another Jack, another Einstein, another Nikola Tesla. And one of those that we miss out on, the effect is global because they have the ability to bring the entire world forward. And so we are set up as an organization, and we're explaining what we've done and the challenges setting up. For example, FEDI was set up in a matter of weeks because we're incorporated in Delaware, but a company that's incorporated in Africa with Nigerians on the board, with the word Bitcoin in it, and it can take years to set some of the aspects up. The same sort of organization where people are banks are fighting you to give them their service, whereas when it's an organization on the global south, people are fighting to sort of kick you out the door. So that was very interesting. We were explaining what we were doing there, but we were also explaining the victories that we've had with the incredible people that we've brought on board. You have Vlad, Abubakar, not the board member Abubakar, but one of the other Bitcoin Core contributors, Abubakar, that's come through the process, and the exciting future that we see there.
This is absolutely fantastic. And I mean, Alex's work again in the space as well is another one of these things that the energy block and the human rights block were both sort of this alternate angles on Bitcoin that isn't the financial, isn't the number go up, but are ways of bringing people in ways that Bitcoin is helping people in, again, not this direct financial way necessarily. Alex's work on the human rights aspect is some of the best, for me, orange pilling material for people who have that as a focus. But the actual work that's being done is clearly amazing. And
if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have set up FEDI. So I previously ran a Bitcoin exchange for a decade, and I sold it. So I was fortunate enough to start very early. And at the time, I did a talk about this protocol called Fedimint that I thought was incredibly powerful. And then I was planning to go off on, holiday or relax for a few years after running in a Bitcoin exchange for a decade. And he insisted I go to the Oslo Freedom Forum, and I heard these stories of these incredibly brave men and women. And it made me realize until everybody on this planet is free, no one is. And I couldn't just, in all good conscience, stop. And I decided to start again with my co-founders. We set up FEDI, and the rest is history. So, and he does that with every time he writes an article, writes a book, it affects the hearts and minds of many people around the world.
It's so there's so many similar things going on in parallel here. I feel like there are articles being written, books being written a couple of years back, and we see the ideas from these things like materialize now. And it's the same thing with Free Madeira. Like 18 months ago, we were here and doing that thing, and now we see this flourishing and everything that comes off of that and all the ideas. Nostr, for instance, was a similar thing, just some idea that someone riffing with someone, and all of a sudden this all comes together, and it's just beautiful to see, to be in real time and see it play out.
I think I would be interested in your views, because there is this sort of war, in a way, between two ideologies, the ideology of centralization and control, and the ideology of decentralization and private property, private rights. Have you had any thoughts about that?
I have. And,
of course.
No, but one of the things I was thinking so many things as you all were talking, that what is amazing about these individual conversations is and this community is, it's all grassroots and it's individual by individual, and you talk to the next person and it just generates, it's like a snowball effect. But I think, about the US context, for example, where I do think so much of this is about control. I hear this a lot in the Bitcoin context, which is, well, why does the SEC try to, why are all these punitive actions taken by the SEC against Bitcoin? And it's a power thing. And the central government doesn't want to give that up. And so I think it is a real struggle. And as our conversations keep going and snowballing, the hope, I think, is that will overcome that struggle and the wrestling of power from the centralized forces like a government.
And we're seeing it step by step. But as it's making progress, whether it's in the corporate sphere or the financial sphere with Bitcoin ETFs, or whether it's at the technology level, we take steps towards empowering communities everywhere. But the people who are affected by that, who have been for many, many decades, if not centuries, have taken for granted the fact that they have the ability to control centrally, are going to not take that lightly. But luckily, with the energy of the community that we have around us, and the capabilities, we will find solutions and find ways to continue making progress, because this is the natural state of things. We take advantage of community. We take advantage of the people around us to benefit everybody.
Yeah, and I think the analogy is often made with like between this and Blockbuster Video or Fujifilm, or like how a disruptive technology came and disrupted, like obsoleted something old, or is cars and horses or whatever. But this is like everything. Money touches everything, and the power structures also it's a real David and Goliath story. And all the people here and all the people in Bitcoin are people who believe that the better idea will win in the end. And regardless of how much force they put up against it, we believe that the better idea is the winner in the long run.
I was also on this centralized versus decentralized question, thinking about, and because I'm writing, my current book project is on new technologies, and that cycle of every time a new technology comes out and scales, there's this sense of threat against the status quo power.
Yeah.
And so I have a chapter on cryptocurrency, and it's interesting to watch the evolution of traditional banking, which was so hostile. And now suddenly they want a big chunk of this and it's an interesting, sort of not micro, but aspect of that struggle, which is these traditional banks that felt threatened and tried to keep pushing back. Then the idea, I think, won them over, and the prospect of gaining from it. And now you end up with, and the long struggle for ETFs in the US, finally, I should say, after 11 years.
Yes.
Finally coming to fruition.
A funny story. So I said before here, my previous company was a Bitcoin exchange, and it ran for a decade. In 2014, we were a year old then. Naively, we applied we were based in the UK, a UK Bitcoin exchange, applied for a Bitcoin ETF in 2014. We were slightly early. We were basically laughed out of the room whenever we'd go into the various different financial institutions you have to talk to have one of these activated. And we were, our eyes were bigger than our belly, as my father would say as well. We weren't ready for it. But it's really interesting to see that, a decade later, it's finally happened there. But at the same time, in parallel, you're seeing this grassroots adoption, and you're seeing different communities that really need to be empowered and have the energy and the desire to have a problem solved, like the activist community, the human rights defender community, the humanitarian community, are now finding by themselves that Bitcoin can actually help solve their problem. And I think the marriage of people who are really passionate and believe about improving society, and then people who are really passionate about helping disempowered communities around the world coming together, I think is also going to be, it's not talked about as much right now over the ETF, but I think that's going to be as powerful, if not more, over the coming years.
Yeah, we had Troy Cross and Daniel Batten here for the previous commentary booth, and a similar thing, like when you said you were early, reminds me of the flare gas things where they connect miners to methane flare gas waste, and that people tried to do that like 5 years ago, but it didn't really take off. And like it's like you have to have the right timing. But at the end of the day, like all these institutions, everything, there's an individual behind each and every decision that ever happens, and each and every individual human being on the planet has an incentive to become a Bitcoiner. Everyone's incentivized to be that, including like the central bankers, if they just think for a while. Like at the end of the day, I think everyone has something to benefit from adopting a Bitcoin standard somewhere.
That's why when I've interviewed people for this book, they say, watch what the banking community does, not what they say.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's
absolutely
insight.
Yeah. Always look at what people do, not what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where you know the truth.
That's what you know.
A classic example is Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan, and
that's who I was thinking
he's historically incredibly negative, but the same week he's saying that you should ban this thing.
Yeah.
He's helping underpin many of the new ETFs at the same time. Yeah.
Or
it's Bitcoin for me. Bitcoin for me, fiat for D,
Flying to Davos in a private jet and telling people to eat the bugs. That's another example.
All right. Hey, this has been a fantastic session. Any final thoughts about the theme of freedom and human rights? Sarah?
I think there's a lot of reason for pessimism in the world, but coming here this weekend, being part of this panel just gives me so much reason for hope.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always just incredibly humbled and honored by the people that I get to work with, support, and they support me, and they're supporting billions of people around the world. So they should just keep doing what they're doing, and the Bitcoin community will do everything to support them, I'm sure, over this, and ensure that they succeed.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot for joining us for day 2 of Bitcoin Atlantis. We have day 3 coming up tomorrow, where we'll wrap up with a whole session on everything that's going on with Madeira. And then Jeff Booth is curating a special session to round us off. That one's a little hard to explain in a few words, so you'll just have to tune in for that. Obi, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. And this has been it for us for day 2 of Bitcoin Atlantis. Thanks again.
See you.